Chapter 1, The Crash. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Written in first person by Ethan Carter. It was supposed to be just another quiet night in the Nevada desert. The kind of night where the wind hums a lazy tune across the sand, and the stars above shine a little too bright for comfort. I'd lived out here long enough to get used to the silence. No traffic. No sirens. Just me, my tools, and the kind of peace most people would kill for. But peace has a way of shattering itself when the universe decides you're next in line. That night, I was tinkering with an old solar inverter in my workshop behind the house. I'd bought it from a military surplus auction, and like most of those bargains, it was half fried. I wasn't fixing it for any real reason, just trying to keep busy. When you've spent the better part of 5 years alone in the desert, busy becomes a survival mechanism. It happened at exactly 11:47 p.m. I remember the time because my old radio scanner squawked with static right before the sky lit up like God had dropped a flare over the mountains. The light came from nowhere, an electric blue streak tearing across the sky, trailing behind a tail of heat and fire. Then a thunderous boom shook the ground like a mini earthquake. My coffee cup fell off the workbench, shattering against the floor. For a full 5 seconds, I just stood there, holding my breath, watching the horizon burn. Then I ran. I didn't stop to grab my phone or my flashlight. Just adrenaline and instinct. I jumped into my truck, slammed the door shut, and hit the ignition. The engine sputtered like it always did, then came to life with a low growl. The sky above was already darkening again, but a faint orange glow still pulsed in the distance, just past the rocky ridge near Miller's Hollow. It couldn't have been a meteor. The trajectory was too flat, the sound too wrong. Something had come down, and I was going to find it. The drive took less than 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The closer I got, the more the air changed. I don't mean temperature, though it was definitely hotter. No, I mean the atmosphere. The desert, normally bone dry and neutral smelling, suddenly felt electric. The hairs on my arms stood up. My teeth tingled. I couldn't explain it. Like something was wrong with the world, but only I could feel it. I parked behind a ridge and hiked the last quarter mile on foot. I didn't want my headlights giving me away if someone else was already there. And truthfully, I wasn't sure what I'd find. A satellite? A drone? Some top-secret Air Force project gone sideways? What I found was a crater. A perfect, smoking, 20-foot wide scar carved into the earth, still glowing at the edges. My boots crunched softly on the blackened gravel as I stepped closer. The center of the impact site steamed like a dying engine. Twisted metal shimmered in the crater's heart like something torn violently in half. Then I saw movement. At first, I thought it was just heat distortion. But no. Someone was crawling away from the wreckage. Slowly. Desperately. I crouched behind a boulder, heart pounding. Logic screamed at me to leave. To turn around and pretend I'd never seen any of this. But curiosity is a stronger drug than fear. I pulled my flashlight from my pocket and clicked it on. The beam caught it square in the back. It froze. Then it turned. What I saw was not human. At least, not entirely. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, wide and sharp like those of a cat, but deeper, more ancient. Its skin, if that's what it was, gleamed silver blue under the light, and its limbs were long and sinewy, with joints that bent at impossible angles. A trickle of deep violet liquid oozed from a wound on its side. Not blood. Something thicker. The thing, he just looked at me. Neither hostile, nor afraid. Just watching. And then, with a wheeze that sounded like crushed glass, he spoke. A sound. Just one. Not a word I recognized, hell, maybe not a word at all. But something in the tone reached me. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't aggression. It was a plea. He collapsed. I stood frozen for another full minute. I knew what I should do. Call the authorities. Report the crash. Keep a safe distance. But something in me wouldn't move. Wouldn't walk away. Instead, I stepped down into the crater. The closer I got, the more real he became. Flesh and bone and something more. Not mechanical. Not synthetic. Alive. I dropped to one knee beside him. His breathing was ragged. The wound on his side looked bad, burnt, possibly fractured. His fingers twitched like he was trying to reach for something. I looked around. Nothing. Just wreckage and dust. I had no first aid kit. No protocol. No plan. But I had a truck. And blankets. And a barn that hadn't been used since my dad passed 5 years ago. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was suicide. But I lifted him gently as I could and carried him back to the truck. Back at my house, I cleared the old workbench in the barn and laid him out. The violet liquid had soaked through his suit if it was a suit and pooled on the wood. I wrapped him in an old army blanket and used a sterilized scalpel to clean the edges of the wound. He stirred once, eyes fluttering open, then closed again. He didn't try to fight me. Didn't scream. Just breathed. Just lived. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the barn doors shut, the house lights off, and the radio turned low. Something had fallen out of the sky. And now, something was in my barn. And the craziest part of all? I didn't feel fear. I felt responsible. Like my life, every random choice and lonely mile had led me to this moment. I didn't know his name yet. But I knew, somehow, that he wasn't here to hurt me. And I also knew this was just the beginning. Chapter 1, Part 2. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. I woke up in my kitchen chair with my head resting on the table and my shotgun still leaning against the door. The early morning sun crept through the blinds, casting thin slats of light across the floor. For a second, I thought it had all been a dream. Then I remembered the smell. Something faint, metallic, and strangely clean still clinging to my clothes. I stood and looked out the window facing the barn. Still closed. Still quiet. Still, occupied. I brewed a pot of coffee and stood by the door for a long time, mug in hand, mind racing. I wasn't stupid, I knew the implications of what I'd seen. If word got out, my property would be swarming with men in black SUVs before sundown. They'd take him. They'd take everything. And I'd vanish into the same darkness that swallowed every other person who saw something they weren't supposed to. But it wasn't fear that made me stay quiet. It was him. Something about the way he looked at me. Not like a lab rat. Not like prey. But like, he was asking for help. I walked to the barn slowly, each step heavy with doubt. I pulled the sliding door open just enough to slip inside. He was awake. Sitting upright barely with his back against the wall, the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. His eyes tracked me immediately, bright with a kind of intelligence that made my skin crawl in the best way. He didn't speak. Neither did I. We just watched each other for a moment. Then he raised one hand slowly and pressed it to his chest. A gesture. Then he pointed at me. And did it again. Chest. Me repeat. I blinked. Then it hit me, he was trying to introduce himself. Your name? I asked, cautiously. He nodded. I hesitated, then tapped my own chest. Ethan. His eyes blinked twice slowly. Then he opened his mouth and made a sound. Not a word. Not English. But soft, resonant, almost harmonic. Kael. That's what it sounded like, anyway. Kael. Over the next hour, I sat on an overturned bucket and just watched him. His breathing was steadier now, though still shallow. His suit or skin, I couldn't yet tell, had a thin layer of hexagonal texture, like interlocking armor plates. When he shifted, they moved like muscles. I noticed something else, too. He was cold. Not dead cold. Not feverish either. Just, not warm. Like a machine that had been left in the shade for too long. But he wasn't a machine. I was sure of that now. At some point, he tried to stand and collapsed again with a sharp hiss of pain. "No, no, no," I said, rushing forward. "You're hurt. Stay down." He flinched at first, probably from my tone, but didn't resist when I steadied him. He looked up at me, confused. Then something strange happened. The air between us hummed. Not audibly, but in my head. Like static behind my thoughts. A low vibration. Then a flicker, an image flashed in my mind's eye. A memory. Not mine. A dark, spherical craft. Fire. Screams in a language I couldn't understand. Then a map. A star chart. A red warning light blinking across systems I'd never seen. I staggered back. What the hell? Kael was still watching me. But now, he looked more alert. Focused. "You did that?" I asked, pointing to my temple. He blinked again. He didn't smile. Not really. But the corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. He knew exactly what he'd done. Over the next few hours, we worked out a rhythm. He needed water, but not food, at least, not any that I had. I brought him clean towels and a heating lamp I normally used for thawing car batteries in the winter. He didn't say much, well, anything, but the way he watched me, there was gratitude in it. Real emotion. More than once, I caught myself forgetting he was alien. He was just someone trying not to die. By the second night, the questions started eating at me. Why me? Why this place? Was the crash an accident or something worse? I sat outside on the porch, shotgun across my lap, watching the stars. That same blue streak from the night before haunted my vision. A message? A warning? My life before this moment had been a slow, steady drift into isolation. I didn't mind it. But now, for the first time in years, I felt needed. That scared me more than anything else. Because if he was real, and I knew he was, then so was everything that came with him. His enemies. His past. And whatever was coming next. Chapter 1, Part 3. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. The third morning began with the sound of silence breaking. Not the peaceful kind, the sharp kind, the kind that stabs your nerves awake. I was in the barn again, wiping Kael's face with a damp cloth. His fever, if that's what you'd call it, had stabilized. His breathing was smoother, though still shallow. He hadn't spoken since that moment in my mind 2 nights ago, but his eyes followed everything I did. It felt less like he was observing me, and more like he was studying me. Then we heard it. Womp womp. A slow, rhythmic thumping, far off but unmistakable. A helicopter. Military. I ran outside and scanned the sky. Sure enough, low on the horizon, a dark silhouette was cutting through the air about 10 miles north, heading toward the canyon. I didn't panic, not yet. This was Nevada. Military flyovers happened. Red flag drills from Nellis AFB weren't unusual. But something in my gut twisted. They weren't here yet. But they were looking. And the only thing worth looking for in this stretch of dead desert was currently lying in my barn. I bolted back inside. Kael was sitting upright, alert, eyes locked on the barn door like he'd felt the same dread I had. I opened my mouth to explain, but he beat me to it. Not with words. With images. Again, like before, only this time clearer. I saw through him, a barren landscape lit by a red sun, cities floating above the ground in silent ruins. Then, a black-shaped needle-like, sharp, descending from orbit. Screams. Fire. A sense of cold, metallic finality. Then the Earth. Zoomed in. Blue. Green. Innocent. A safe zone. A refuge. A last chance. Then it was gone. I staggered again, bracing myself against the wall. You were, escaping, I muttered, piecing it together. You weren't sent. You ran. Kael didn't nod. Didn't confirm it. But his silence screamed volumes. And somehow, I understood. Whatever had happened to his world, whatever that black needle in the sky had been, it was coming here. Eventually. And Kael might be the only one who could stop it. Or the reason it found us. By late afternoon, the sky had returned to normal. But I hadn't. I couldn't sit still. My hands were shaking. I walked circles around the house, checked the driveway 3 times, wiped the same countertop for 10 minutes straight. Because now I wasn't just harboring a fugitive alien. I was harboring truth. And truth, out here, was dangerous. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, I brought Kael outside. He couldn't walk yet, not fully, but he leaned on my shoulder. Together we sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. He looked up at them the way I looked at old photographs, half awe, half mourning. I figured he'd lost more than I could imagine. Family. A home. A galaxy. And here I was, a guy who hadn't spoken to another human face to face in weeks, suddenly playing nurse, smuggler, and interstellar translator. Life's weird that way. I don't know what you're running from, I said aloud. But if you're here, if you crashed on my land, then maybe that means something. Kael turned his head slightly. Not much, just enough. I don't know what you need, I added, but I think you need me. He stared at me, those strange glowing eyes unreadable. Then, for the first time since the crash, he reached out, not mentally, not through images, but physically. He placed a hand on my forearm. His fingers were cool, gentle, oddly human. And in that gesture, I understood. This wasn't about rescue. This was about survival. For both of us. Chapter 2, Part 2. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. I didn't sleep that night. The image of that star map of Earth blinking red like a target burned itself into the back of my mind. The signal was out now. That much was clear. The question wasn't if someone would answer. It was who would answer first. I sat in the barn well past midnight, watching the device Kael had built pulse quietly like it had a heartbeat of its own. He wasn't speaking, not even through his strange flashes of memory, but he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. He was waiting for a response. And he was afraid of what might respond. It happened around 2:17 a.m. At first, I thought it was just the wind picking up until the wind began to whistle upward, like a jet engine spooling in reverse. Then the light outside the barn changed just slightly, like moonlight filtered through a dirty lens. Kael stood immediately, alert, body tense. I grabbed my shotgun from the hook by the door, not because I thought it would help, but because it made me feel less useless. Then came the sound. A low hum. Not mechanical. Not natural. Like something hovering just above understanding. We stepped outside together. The desert stretched quiet and endless, but something shimmered just over the ridge like heat distortion, only vertical, cylindrical, and, there. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't even see it fully. But I felt it. A presence. Kael raised his hand slowly and made a circular motion in the air. From his wrist, a tiny sliver of light shot upward like a flare. No explosion, no sound, just a thread of signal pulsing into the night. The distortion above the ridge blinked then vanished. Gone. Like it had never been there. Kael lowered his arm. Then he turned to me. And for the first time since I'd found him, he looked uncertain. Like he didn't know what that had been either. Or worse, he did know. We didn't sleep after that. Kael dismantled the signal core by morning. Carefully. Deliberately. As if he wanted to hide it again. Whatever answer he'd hoped for, this wasn't it. His hands moved faster now. Sharper. Like he was working against a clock I couldn't see. I asked him what he saw. He didn't answer. But I remembered the emotion from the night before. The countdown. Around noon, I heard tires on gravel. A car. Dust rising on the horizon. Too slow for police. Too quiet for military. It was a local truck, a beat-up silver Chevy. And the man inside was someone I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. Roy Mercer. Old friend. Former Army. Now, sheriff's deputy for the county. He got out slow, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Ethan," he called. "You home?" I stepped out of the barn, trying not to look like I was hiding an extraterrestrial guest behind the door. "Roy. What brings you all the way out here?" He looked at me carefully, eyes scanning, calculating. "Heard a report of unusual radio interference near the sector. Scrambled signals bouncing off the old relay tower. You wouldn't happen to be fiddling with one of your science projects again, would you?" I smiled. "Just the solar junk. You know me. Wires and duct tape." He nodded, slowly. Didn't press. But his eyes drifted to the barn behind me. "You mind if I take a look around?" My heart pounded. This was it. "I mind," I said, as evenly as I could. "Private property. Unless you've got a warrant, Roy." He didn't smile. Didn't argue either. Just nodded again. "Well. If you see anything strange, lights, sounds, whatever, be sure to let someone know, all right?" "Sure thing." He paused. Then looked at me dead in the eye. "You stay safe, Ethan." Then he got in his truck and drove off. I didn't move for a full minute. Then I turned to the barn. Kael was already gone. I found him later behind the ridge, crouched in a ditch, eyes scanning the sky. We weren't safe anymore. And the signal? It had worked. But it hadn't brought allies. It had brought attention. Chapter 2, Signals. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living on borrowed time. Every knock at the door made me flinch. Every drone-like hum in the sky twisted my stomach into knots. The kind of paranoia that seeps into your bones not because you're crazy, but because you know something's coming. Because something already came. And it was sleeping in my barn. Kael was recovering faster than I expected. By the end of the first week, he could stand with support. By the second, he was walking limping, but upright. Every day, his skin, or armor, or whatever that shimmering layer was, seemed to repair itself bit by bit. I watched it close over wounds like liquid metal solidifying into steel. The guy was tough. But what really surprised me wasn't the healing. It was the building. On the 11th day after the crash, Kael motioned for me to follow him to the crater. The wreckage was still there, though it had settled into the dirt like it had always belonged. Birds were back. Coyote tracks lined the edges. But I noticed something new, something buried in the side of the crater. A curved piece of obsidian-colored metal, humming faintly with a blue pulse. Kael knelt beside it and began digging with his hands. Not fast. Not frantically. Carefully. He didn't look at me. Just gestured. Help. It took us nearly 4 hours, but eventually, we unearthed what looked like a collapsed pod or module. about the size of a motorcycle engine, but sleek and alive. Parts of it shifted under Kael's touch, realigning like it was responding to him or recognizing him. He placed his palm against a hexagonal panel. With a soft chirp, it lit up. I staggered back. Jesus! Kael didn't even flinch. He was focused, hands moving with precision across glowing symbols I didn't recognize, half glyph, half code. A tiny disc-shaped drone lifted out of the module's side and hovered silently, scanning him with a green beam before retreating back inside. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a radio. It was a memory. A core. A piece of his ship. I didn't have to ask to know what he was doing. He was trying to call home. Or, what was left of it. Back at the barn, Kael started building. He used whatever scraps I could find: copper wire, old solar cells, bits of radio transceivers and generator parts. It was incredible. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. I could see it in his eyes. He was assembling something urgent. Something vital. And it needed to be finished before they found us. Because they were definitely coming. That night, I heard the static again. Just like before the crash. This time, it wasn't coming from my radio. It was coming from the barn. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The night was still, windless, the stars hanging low. But the barn glowed faintly under the edges of the door, blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Inside, Kael stood in front of the device he'd built. It looked like a satellite dish fused with a crystal turbine, hovering a few inches above the workbench. In the center, a spiral of light spun slowly, projecting a holographic image into the air. A map. Stars. Constellations I'd never seen. Then the spiral narrowed, zooming in on a region I somehow recognized. Earth. Then, another planet. Red. Wounded. Then a warning symbol. Flashing red. Spreading. Infection. I didn't need to be a genius to understand it. Something was spreading. And Earth was next on the path. Kael turned to me. He stepped forward and placed both hands on my shoulders. Then, again, the connection. But this time, it wasn't just an image. It was emotion. Desperation. Regret. Hope. Fear. And something else, something terrifying. A countdown. The signal he was sending wasn't just a beacon. It was a flare. And anyone could see it, friend or foe. Chapter 3, The Decision. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. I always thought choices were simple. You're either right or you're wrong. You help or you don't. You stay or you go. But that was before I stood at the edge of a crater, staring down at alien technology buried under the sand, with a being from another world bleeding on my workbench and helicopters circling the sky like vultures sensing death on the wind. That was before the silence started to feel like a ticking clock. Now I knew better. Sometimes, choices aren't between right and wrong. Sometimes they're between risking everything, and losing everything anyway. Kael and I returned to the barn in silence after Roy's visit. He moved faster now, the limp barely noticeable. His body was healing fast, too fast. I wasn't sure whether that was good or terrifying. He didn't sit. He went straight to the signal device, disassembled earlier, and began rebuilding it again. I stopped him. We can't, I said firmly. He froze, then looked at me. I could tell by his expression that he understood more English now than he let on. You send another signal, and they'll come. Again. Maybe this time not just to watch. I motioned toward the door. There are eyes in the sky, Kael. You saw it last night. He said nothing. But he stepped back from the device. For now. That evening, I finally sat him down. I pulled over an old whiteboard I used to plan solar layouts and began drawing crude symbol circles for planets, triangles for ships, arrows for movement. Who's after you? I drew a black triangle. Enemy. He nodded. I circled Earth. Why come here? He took the marker, paused, and drew a line from the triangle to Earth. Then a barrier, a wall between them. He circled Earth again, slowly. Safe. Or, sheltered. Not for long, though. He pointed to the wall, then made a cracking motion with his fingers. Cracks in the shield. I realized then, Kael hadn't just fled to Earth by accident. Earth was the last uncompromised world. And whatever was chasing him, whatever destroyed his home, it was spreading like a virus through the stars. And Earth was next. So what does this thing do? I asked, pointing to the half-built transmitter. Kael looked at me for a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He spoke. Not through images. Not through projections. But through words. Stilted. Raspy. But clear. Call, others. I blinked. Others. He nodded. Resist. That word hit me like a cold wind. You mean, there's a resistance? Kael looked down. Then slowly nodded again. So now the decision was in my hands. Let him finish the beacon and risk inviting more attention, maybe even death. Or destroy it. Leave Earth blind and alone. Neither option came with comfort. But one offered hope. However slim. That night, I stood alone in the desert again. Stars overhead. Silence around me. Kael asleep in the barn, curled beside the device like it was the only home he had left. I stared at the sky. And I made my choice. By dawn, we were digging the new foundation. We moved the device underground, rewired the signal core, and covered the entire area with metal scrap to mask emissions. I brought out every bit of shielding I had, lead panels from an old physics project, broken Faraday cages, even microwave door mesh. Kael worked faster now. Sharper. Like he knew time was running out. I didn't ask questions. I just helped. By the fourth day, the device was ready. Kael stood beside it with one hand hovering over a glowing orb, his eyes focused on the sky through the barn rafters. He looked at me. Waited. I stepped forward. If this brings them here, if it makes things worse, we stop. Kael nodded. Then he pressed his hand down. The barn filled with light. A deep harmonic pulse filled the air, more felt than heard. Outside, every animal within 5 miles howled, barked, or fled. The signal was out again. But this time, not a flare. Not a scream. A summon. Kael fell to one knee, drained. The orb went dark. The barn returned to silence. And for a moment, I thought we'd failed. Then I heard it. 3 tones, a reply. From the stars. Chapter 4, The Visitors. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. The signal came back like a whisper in my skull. Not through sound. Not through language. Through presence. One moment the barn was still, the next it felt like something had joined us unseen but watching. Like a ripple in reality had brushed across the edge of the world and passed straight through me. Kael stood, slowly. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the device again. The orb that had gone dark began to glow faintly, not blue this time, but silver. And this time, the projection was different. No stars. Just, a face. Not human. Not Kael's species either. Smooth, tall forehead. Skin like dark glass. No mouth, just 2 long, luminous eyes that blink slowly, as though adjusting to our world. The projection stared at Kael. Then it spoke without words directly into my mind. Kael of Lorion. We received your beacon. You are alive. Kael bowed his head slightly. Then the projection turned, to me. I froze. Human. You have harbored the survivor. You have taken part in the resistance. I swallowed hard. I didn't really sign up for anything. A pause. A pulse of thought. And yet, here you are. Kael stepped forward, his voice low but deliberate. This. Ethan. The being nodded or maybe just shifted its form in acknowledgement. He has chosen risk. He must now choose purpose. I narrowed my eyes. What kind of purpose? The image shifted suddenly. We were surrounded by scenes not from Earth. A burning moon. Ships tearing through the sky. Ground battles between species I didn't recognize, some humanoid, some insectoid, some floating in the air like jellyfish wrapped in metal exoskeletons. Then. Earth again. And black spears in orbit. Descending. The drudgery consume. They infect memory, bend light, erase culture. Kael is one of few who escaped before his world fell. We protect remnants. But we cannot do it alone. I turned to Kael. This is why you came here. Kael nodded. Last free planet. I looked back at the projection. What do you want me to do? You are not a soldier. You are not chosen. But you are present. That is enough. We will send others. Kael will prepare you. Prepare me for what? Contact. Then, the image vanished. We stood in silence for a long time. Then Kael finally said it. Visitors, come soon. How soon? He just looked up at the stars. Then he said something that chilled me deeper than anything so far. Before enemy. That night, I dug out my dad's old generator from the tool shed. It hadn't worked in years, but I wasn't about to greet intergalactic guests with no electricity. Kael helped without asking. We were a team now, an unlikely one, but real. And as I rewired the barn circuits by flashlight, I thought back to that first night. When all I saw was a crash. A shape. A pair of strange glowing eyes in the dark. I had no idea what I was getting into. But now I knew exactly what was at stake. 3 days later, they arrived. Not with lights. Not with sound. They appeared just like that on the edge of my property. 3 figures. Tall. Not entirely physical. Wrapped in shimmering cloaks of light that made the air around them warp. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Kael stepped forward to greet them, bowing his head. I didn't bow. I just waited. One of them finally turned to me, raising a slender arm. A spark passed from its fingers to my chest. Not pain. Not warmth. Understanding. I blinked, and suddenly, I could see the map in Kael's mind. The stars. The war. And the choice laid before me. Earth wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It was the next front. And I was part of it now. Chapter 5, Lines in the Sand. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. The first sign that things were slipping came in the form of a surveillance drone. I saw it hovering over the ridge 2 days after the visitors arrived. Not military issued, not that obvious. It was smaller, sleeker, matte black with no ID markings. Just quiet and deliberate, like it belonged there. I followed its path through binoculars. It didn't scout randomly. It moved in calculated sweeps, circling the barn from just outside visible range. The kind of sweep someone might make if they already knew something was there but weren't ready to make a move yet. Kael saw it too. And his reaction was immediate. He shut down the beacon. Disassembled it again. He didn't even speak. Whatever was out there, it wasn't curious. It was confirming. Later that night, I asked one of the visitors, the one I mentally nicknamed the tall one, about the drone. They didn't answer directly. Just stared at the horizon and said in my mind, "Your kind has been touched. Not all are loyal to Earth." That phrase haunted me. Touched? What did that mean? I pressed. "You think someone on Earth is working with the treasury?" A long pause. Then. "Not all hosts are willing. Not all memories remain theirs." Kael stepped forward then, his face grim. He drew 3 symbols in the dirt with a stick. One resembled a person. The second, a twisting vine. The third, a shattered skull. He looked up and said one word. Infiltration. That night, the visitors vanished. No goodbye. No sign. Just, gone. Kael and I stood in the barn alone again, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Because now I knew there were 2 wars happening. One out there in the stars. And one down here on my planet. We made a decision the next morning. We needed to move. Staying in the barn, in the open desert, was too risky. If the drone belonged to human authorities or worse, compromised authorities, then it was only a matter of time before boots showed up on my land. And I was running out of explanations. So we packed what we could: the signal core, Kael's medical kit, my shotgun, tools, food, the Faraday mesh, and a car battery. I reinforced the trailer behind my truck and secured everything beneath a thermal tarp. Kael rewired part of the beacon to run on low power, in case we needed to send out a distress signal again, but he warned me it might draw more than allies. And then we left. We didn't go far. Just up into the foothills where the mines used to be. My dad had worked up there years ago, before the company pulled out. He'd shown me a maintenance shaft once that led into a collapsed tunnel. Perfect place to hide something or someone you didn't want found. We set up camp there. Cold, damp, narrow. But safe. For now. That night, something strange happened. Kael sat by the beacon core, not speaking. I asked if he needed anything. He shook his head. Then he pointed at me, and tapped his chest. "You, changed." I blinked. Changed how? He tilted his head slightly. "Not, afraid." I laughed once, bitter. "I'm terrified. I just don't have the luxury of showing it." He seemed to understand that. Then, slowly, he reached out his hand again. I braced for another vision, but what came next wasn't alien landscapes or space wars. It was a memory. A child. Alone. On a dark metal floor. Kael much younger, surrounded by towering figures in silver robes. Fear. Cold. Isolation. And then, a human voice. Not words. Just tone. Kindness. The memory faded. Kael let go. "Your kind, saved me. Once." I didn't know what to say. So I said the only thing that felt true. "We'll do it again." But 2 days later, I realized not everyone would. Because someone else found us. Not a drone. Not a visitor. Human. Armed. Quiet. Trained. And not alone. Chapter 6, Ghost Protocol. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. They came at dawn. No warnings. No flashing lights. No megaphones. No uniforms. Just 4 men in dark tactical gear, emerging from the mist like shadows with rifles raised and silence in their boots. I woke to the cold metal of a muzzle pressed against my neck. Kael was already gone. They didn't speak to me, just blindfolded, bound, and dragged me out of the mine shaft. I could hear the low hum of a truck engine, the muffled sound of radio static in someone's earpiece. It wasn't military. There were no ID tags, no procedures. This wasn't a rescue or an arrest. This was a containment. The ride lasted about an hour, bumpy and uneven. When they finally pulled the blindfold off, I found myself in an old subterranean bunker, concrete walls stained with age, fluorescent lights flickering above like dying stars. 3 men stood in front of me. The one in the center leaned in, pulled off his gloves, and examined me like I was a puzzle piece missing from his collection. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked. I didn't respond. He smirked. "You've been in contact. Direct. You've touched it?" Still nothing. He stepped closer, then whispered something that sent a chill through my spine. "Do you know how long we've waited for one of them to fall?" That was when I realized something. These men weren't chasing Kael to stop him. They were waiting for him. Hunting him like a prize. Because to them, Kael wasn't a threat. He was a specimen. A key. A weapon. They called themselves Ghost Division. Off-book. Off-grid. Funded by black budgets and corporate defense contracts. They weren't government, but they were everywhere around government. Their goal wasn't defense. It was integration. "Why fight the treasury?" the leader said, "when you can make a deal." He pulled up a screen footage of what looked like a lab. And there, under glass, was another alien. Not Kael's species. Not treasury. Something in between. Something, blended. Human-shaped. Alien-colored. Dead. "We've been working on this for years," he said proudly. "The first hybrids failed. But with your friend's tech, maybe we won't have to fail anymore." I was sick to my stomach. They weren't resisting invasion. They were facilitating evolution at the cost of humanity. "But it's not evolution," I said quietly. "It's replacement." He just shrugged. "Survival's always ugly. That's why we're ahead. Because we accepted it." That's when the lights went out. A loud crack echoed through the bunker. Then screams. Static. A body hit the ground beside me. Then him. Kael stepped into the light, 2 of the guards already unconscious behind him. His body glowed faintly, energy pulsing from his skin. He reached for me, sliced the restraints with a sharpened tool, and grabbed my arm. We ran. Explosions followed us through the corridors, Kael setting charges on the lab equipment as we passed. The beacon core, the stolen tech, the corpse in the tank, we destroyed it all. When we finally reached daylight, the bunker collapsed behind us in a firestorm of dust and fury. Kael didn't speak. Neither did I. There was nothing to say. We drove east. No destination. No plan. Just the road and the realization that Earth wasn't untouched. The treasury hadn't needed to invade. We were already letting them in. Chapter 7, Echoes of the Fall. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. 3 weeks on the run. 3 weeks of backroads, ghost towns, abandoned diners, and long nights sleeping in the truck under starlight that suddenly felt too exposed. Kael barely spoke, and when he did, it was clipped. Focused. He spent hours studying maps, tinkering with the remaining fragments of his beacon, sometimes staring into nothing as if calculating the end of the world in silence. We both knew what was coming. We just didn't know when. I kept hearing echoes of Ghost Division in my head. Why fight the treasury, when you can make a deal? It was worse than a betrayal. It was a voluntary extinction. And the scariest part? It had probably started long before I ever met Kael. We followed whispers through ham radio bursts and encrypted files Kael decrypted using tech from his crash site. They led us to a place I didn't expect, Cairo, Illinois. A forgotten river city turned into a no-man's land after the floods of 2032. The city looked abandoned, but Kael said otherwise. Signal, underneath. We parked near a boarded-up hotel and made our way into what used to be an underground shopping plaza. Half flooded. dark, reeking of mildew and rust. And then, a voice. You lost. We turned slowly. A woman stepped out of the shadows, tall, muscular, scar across her cheek, aiming a pistol like she meant it. Kael didn't move. I raised my hands. We're looking for the signal. The real one. Not the ghosts. She narrowed her eyes. Who are you? I paused. Then said the first thing that came to mind. Someone who said no when he should have said yes. Her name was Marin. Ex-CIA. Now leader of a resistance cell known as Echo Point, a loose network of scientists, ex-military, and civilians who hadn't sold their souls to the treasury or the corporations that backed them. She let us in. And underground, we saw it. A repurposed Cold War missile silo, now lit with alien tech powered by salvaged cores from fallen ships. There were others. 10. Maybe 15. Some human. Some not quite. Kael recognized one, a woman with metallic implants and silver pupils. She hugged him without words. A survivor. Like him. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to not disappear. Marin laid it out on a cracked table while Kael and the others met privately. There are 4 known divisions of the Ghost Protocol left, she said. 2 in the US, 1 in Eastern Europe, and another embedded inside the United Nations Tech Advisory Board. I blinked. The U.N. She nodded. They're already passing laws to allow biometric integration tech. It's not about convenience. It's compliance. Slowly, they're weaving the treasury's influence into our systems. Why? Because extinction is bad for stock prices, she said bitterly. But compliance? That can be monetized. We stayed with them for 3 days. Learned what we could. Shared what we knew. Kael uploaded the last star chart from his beacon core to Echo Point's servers, a map of every infected system, every treasury stronghold, and every allied world left standing. There weren't many. Earth was, on the edge. But what hit me hardest was this. They weren't waiting for heroes. They weren't looking for saviors. They were building a story that would outlast the fall. A record. A resistance. A memory. So when the next planet looked to the stars for hope, they'd find it. Even if we didn't survive. That night, Kael found me alone. He sat down and passed me something small. A ring. Simple. Silver. Embedded with a pulsing dot of crystal. What is it? I asked. He looked at me and said. Memory, of you. Chapter 8, The Betrayer. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. It started with the lights flickering. Marin was mid-sentence, pointing at a grainy satellite image from deep space surveillance, a treasury mothership drifting near a collapsed system, when the overhead fluorescence blinked 3 times. Then the entire room went still. No sound. No hum of equipment. No motion. Just Kael, standing slowly from his seat, his eyes locked on something behind us. We turned together. And there, by the backup generator, was Dorian. A technician. Quiet. Brilliant. He'd been with Echo Point for 2 years. And now he was holding a pulse grenade. Step away from the core, he said calmly. Marin's voice was cold steel. Put it down. Dorian didn't move. His eyes were glazed, pale blue now like frost on glass. Not human. Not fully. Kael stepped forward. Treasury. Dorian turned toward him and smiled. You always did underestimate us, Kael. You assumed infection was physical. But memory, oh, memory is easier to bend. In a flash, Kael leapt forward. The grenade detonated mid-air, releasing not fire but silence. A high-frequency wave that dropped half the room to the floor, clutching their ears. Kael was the only one still standing. He surged through the pulse, tackled Dorian, and drove something sharp into his chest, a shimmering needle that buzzed with energy. Dorian convulsed once, violently, and collapsed. Dead. Gone. Erased. We didn't cheer. We didn't breathe. Marin slowly sat up, blood trickling from one ear. Is it over? She whispered. Kael shook his head. No. Begun. That night, we held a burial in the silo chamber, what was left of Dorian, anyway. Some of the tech team tried to recover his files, but they were laced with dormant code psychic triggers Kael called echo rot. Memory bombs, he explained. Planted. Spread. I asked him what would have happened if the grenade had gone off fully. He didn't answer. He just placed a hand on my shoulder. And for the first time since we'd met, he looked afraid. The next morning, Marin gave us a choice. Stay and help reinforce Echo Point or run. This isn't the only cell, she said. But the others are falling. Fast. We've gone silent with 2 European bases and a hub in Rio. Whatever the Treasury are doing, it's accelerating. Kael turned to me. You, choose. I stared at the maps. The files. The people we just almost died for. But deep down, I knew. Echo Point was no longer safe. Not with ghosts already inside the walls. We run, I said. And we take this fight global. Kael nodded once. Then Marin handed me something small, a data crystal. Coordinates, she said. There's one place left that might still be dark. Where? She smiled grimly. Alaska. We left that afternoon. Kael in the passenger seat, tuning the beacon to low frequency again. And me behind the wheel, gripping the ring he'd given me. A memory. A bond. A warning. Because now we knew. The Treasury weren't coming. They were already here. Chapter 9, Last Light North. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. Alaska was colder than I remembered. Not just in temperature, but in spirit. We arrived in early November, when the daylight barely lasted 5 hours and the sky wore a permanent bruise. Snow blew sideways across the roads, and the world felt forgotten just the way the resistance had hoped. Kael didn't speak much during the journey. He was focused. Alert. Always scanning, always recalibrating the beacon core in his lap. It pulsed once every few minutes like a heartbeat, just enough to confirm we were still being tracked. But not by who. The coordinates Marin gave us led to a decommissioned NORAD radar base near the Yukon River, abandoned since 1991, or so the records claimed. But when we reached it, Kael stopped walking halfway up the snowy path and tilted his head. What is it? I asked. He pressed his hand to the ground. And whispered. Old, here. The door to the base was frozen shut, but Kael bypassed it with a quick charge from the beacon core. The lock melted, and the doors creaked open into darkness. Inside, we expected dust, silence, maybe some leftover coffee cups from the Cold War. What we found was technology. Not human. Not Kael's either. The walls were warm to the touch. The lights hummed on before we even stepped inside. And in the center of the facility, beneath a dome-shaped reactor, was something we couldn't explain. A monolith. Black. Floating. Pulsing once every 10 seconds like a silent breath. Kael fell to one knee the moment he saw it. Kael. I rushed to him. What is it? His voice trembled. It is not ours. The monolith wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a transmitter. It was a recording device. A memory core, older than any of Kael's archives. As he touched its surface, images bled into the air, vast cities of light built beneath oceans, beings of pure energy flowing through crystal structures. Then came the burning. Then the darkness. Then the Treasury. But it wasn't Kael's world. It wasn't Earth. It was something else. A third race. A forgotten intelligence that had once warned others of the treasury's spread, and failed. They had buried their final message deep beneath Earth's ice. Waiting for someone to find it? Kael turned to me with a grim expression. They knew. Knew what? Earth was always target. Not random. He looked up at the monolith as it played a final image. Earth's solar system, outlined in red. A faint voice echoed from the stone, not in English, not in Kael's language, but I understood it anyway. The final echo is here. If you hear this, you are the last light. We stayed there for 3 days. Kael copied everything into the beacon core. He barely ate. Barely rested. He said the monolith was dying, its power flickering after millennia underground. If he didn't extract the data now, it would be lost forever. I watched him work. Watched the snow bury our tracks outside. Watched the sky flicker at night with the strange aurora of a world changing. And I realized something terrifying. We weren't just the last hope. We were the last witnesses. The night before we planned to leave, Kael handed me the core. Not a backup. The main unit. I stared at him. Why me? He tapped his chest once. Then pointed to mine. If I fall, the light continues. I didn't want that responsibility. But I nodded. Because deep down, I already knew. He was preparing for something. And it wasn't good. Chapter 10, The Fall of Silence. Unexpected Allies, My Journey with an Alien. Narrated by Ethan Carter. It happened at first light. I had just stepped outside the bunker, Kael's beacon core secured in my backpack, a rifle slung across my shoulder, and a thermos of half-warm coffee in hand. The air was still. Too still. Then came the hum. Not wind. Not wildlife. But something beneath the snow. Moving. Kael burst from the tunnel seconds later, eyes wide. Run. That's all he said. And then the ground exploded. Figures rose from the snow like shadows wrapped in static, sleek, fast, not quite solid. They shimmered between forms, sometimes bipedal, sometimes serpentine, always wrong. Their movements skipped frames, like broken video. Treasury. Not drones. Not whispers. Hunters. Kael charged the first one, striking it with an energy pulse that shattered its outer shell. But there were too many. They weren't here for me. They were here for him. He turned to me once, just once, and in my mind I heard. Go. I didn't want to. But I ran. I made it 2 miles through the forest before the first signal hit. The beacon core in my bag lit up, flashing red, pulsing harder than before. And then it played a message. Kael's voice. Ethan, you carry last light. Do not stop. Find the next. They must know. They must remember. His voice broke slightly. You were not chosen. You chose. That is stronger. Then silence. I kept running. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of a frozen road, flagged down a snow-covered rig hauling telecom cables, and lied my way into a ride back to Anchorage. I didn't say a word the whole drive. But I held the beacon close. And I knew what I had to do. Epilogue, signal. Somewhere in deep orbit above Europa, a listening station long thought dead blinked back to life. A message pulsed across its quantum net. Encrypted. Ancient. And human. The technicians on duty stared in disbelief as an Earth-based frequency long dormant broke through the treasury's sensor wall. To any resistance still out there. This is Earth. We remember. We resist.